Hill 881. South died at 10:37 on the dot. I know the exact minute because I had been staring at my watch, counting the hours until chow, like a starving man watching bread rise. The second hand ticked, I blinked, and the whole ridge just ceased. One heartbeat, it was there, green, smug, sitting under its crown of jungle. The next heartbeat, everything went white, then orange, then white again, as if someone had torn a hole straight down into hell, and the light came roaring up to meet us. The explosion did not reach us at first. What arrived was a silence so clean, so church quiet, it felt personal. 6,000 Marines, frozen on the airstrip, staring at a mountain dissolving in front of us. No sound except the faint ticking in my own head. I remember thinking it was almost quaint of the universe to give us those 3 seconds, a tiny moment to appreciate the spectacle before the world changed. Then the pressure wave hit. My flak jacket punched up into my chin. The air slammed into my chest hard enough to burp me. Helmets rattled like tin bowls. Someone's cigarette shot out of his mouth and spiraled away. Behind me, a private dropped an entire crate of 81mm mortar rounds and did not even curse. Just let them lie there. What did any of it matter now that mountains could be erased like chalk drawings? More rounds came in, a whole string of them, marching up the flank of the ridge with methodical cruelty. Ancient trees went up like matchsticks. Dirt geysered into the sky, hanging there in slow, rust-colored clouds before raining back down in clods heavy enough to crack bone. One chunk the size of a bowling ball smacked the tarmac 10 feet from me and burst like a rotten melon. Another hit a parked Huey, that is a helicopter, and spun it on its skids, shrieking metal protesting as if it had feelings. None of us moved. O'Malley broke the spell with a low whistle, the kind a man makes at a woman so beautiful she does not seem real. Jesus wept, he said softly. They just erased the whole fucking hill. Thompson did not speak. He never wasted words on the obvious. He just stared through his dust goggles, eyes narrowed to slits, studying the explosions like a scholar interpreting scripture. Artillery was a language to him. Every plume, every flash, every pause meant something. Me. I stood there with my mouth open, tasting metal on my tongue. My legs felt nailed to the dirt, terror and boredom. That was Khe Sanh's specialty. You could feel both at the same time. 2 hands on your throat, one choking, one steadying. After maybe 30 seconds, the barrage flicked off. No fade out, no mercy. One moment, the ridge was dying violently. The next, it was smoking quietly. Black columns twisted into the pale sky. Somewhere up there, Bravo Company was either fighting to breathe or fighting to stop breathing. Probably both. A voice behind me, high, cracked, probably 19 years old, asked, "Think anybody's still alive up there?" Nobody answered. The silence did that for us. Naturally, after watching a mountain get murdered, the Corps decided what we needed most was manual labor. 10 minutes later, we were handed shovels and marched toward a mound of red dirt the size of a courthouse. "Sandbag detail, on the double," a lieutenant shouted, voice bright like he was announcing a raffle winner. The devil could run a factory exactly like that. 50 Marines in a ragged line, chopping at sun-baked clay that was hard as brick on top and soft as swamp underneath. You cracked the crust, scooped the sludge, and dumped it in a sack one guy held like a kid waiting for Halloween candy. Tie it off, toss it, repeat. The sun climbed straight overhead and turned us into boiling meat. Within the first hour, my palms were shredded. Blisters bubbled up, tore open, and filled again. Blood slicked the handle of my shovel, so I wrapped it in a strip of undershirt. But the shirt soaked through fast and just glued itself to the wood. Every swing felt like skin peeling off in ribbons. Dust mixed with the blood and turned my hands into something gritty and awful. O'Malley naturally tried to turn it into a sport. $5 says I fill 15 bags before you hit 10, he said, already waist deep in the pit, swinging like Paul Bunyan on meth. You're on, I grunted. The truth. I needed the distraction more than the money. He won in 8 minutes flat. Did not even breathe hard doing it, just shoveled and hummed. When he finished, he planted the shovel, wiped his forehead with a forearm thicker than my calf, and held out his hand. Pay the man. I slapped the crumpled bill into his palm. He jogged off to the PX Hooch, the supply shack, and came back 5 minutes later with 2 glass bottles of Coke sweating under the sun. The labels had faded until they were nearly white. He cracked both caps on the edge of a sandbag and handed one over. "Half size," he said, "courtesy of your complete lack of hustle." The Coke was flat. I drank it in one pull anyway, because it was cold when you first touched it, and sweet for half a second, and that was enough to feel like home. I tipped the empty bottle and watched the final drop slide down like a tear. "America," O'Malley said, raising his bottle heavenward. "Yeah," I said, "America." Then we went back to digging. Hours passed in a blur of sweat and red dust. By 1600, that is 4 p.m., the pile finally started to shrink, though it felt more like the ground beneath it was rising to meet us. My palms were raw meat. Every sandbag I tied held a special part of me. I started counting them as if each one were a prayer bead or an apology. By the time the sun began to drop and the air cooled enough to breathe again, the world felt hushed and strange, like something was drawing a deep breath just out of sight. And that is exactly when the first incoming round screamed overhead. The first artillery shell came in high, so high it sounded like it had started falling sometime back in the Eisenhower administration. A long rising whistle that tightened every muscle in my back. It ended 50 meters behind the chow tent in an explosion that turned the sky orange from underneath, the kind of color you only see during house fires, and the end of the world. For a heartbeat, the whole base froze. Then the rest of the battery joined in. The second shell landed closer, the third closer still. Then they all came together. 130 millimeters, 122s, rockets big enough to knock a truck sideways, pouring down the slopes like the NVA had decided to scrape us off the map one grid square at a time. Boom after boom until the ground shook like some ancient thing, waking up angry. 8 hours, they would later tell us. 8 straight hours. But in the moment, time fell apart. Seconds felt like years. Years felt like they were happening all at once. I did not have time to think. Nobody did. I dove for the nearest trench, the same miserable slit I had pissed in the night before, and skidded into it face first, knocking loose a cloud of sour-smelling dirt. Fuck, Thompson was already there. Helmet tipped forward, knees up, chewing a wad of tobacco that would have put a mule down. He did not look scared. He looked annoyed, the way a man looks when a neighbor starts mowing the lawn during his nap. A shell detonated close, too close, and the flash lit us bone white. The concussion hit a fraction of a second later, a hammer made of hot air. My teeth snapped together hard enough to ring my skull. Something metallic clipped my boot heel and kept going. I ducked instinctively, hands covering my helmet. My whole body wanted to crawl backwards into the earth like a mole. Thompson spat a long brown stream that arced calmly into the dirt. "Relax," he muttered, as if we were discussing the weather. "They are still registering. See how it is walking west? They are looking for the ammo dump again." Another shell cracked overhead and burst midair, showering us with shrapnel. One piece sliced the air above my shoulder and punched into the mud a foot from my face. If it had been 6 inches lower, I would have spent the rest of the night trying to find my arm. I started praying, or something like praying. It was more like a frantic chant. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, do not let the next one have my name on it. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph." The words blurred together until they stopped being words and became pure fear. The barrage tightened. The base shook constantly now, like we were sitting on the back of a giant animal convulsing under us. You could feel every impact through your ribs. A generator sputtered somewhere behind us, trying to cling to life, and then quit. The string of lights along the trench line flickered out. Darkness flooded the base, thick and drowning, broken only by the flash of incoming rounds and the occasional parachute flare drifting down. Someone was screaming for a corpsman. Someone else was laughing, a thin, desperate laugh that sounded like it hurt. I wedged my flashlight between my teeth and pulled out my journal, the only thing I owned besides my rifle that felt like it belonged to me and not to the Corps. My hands shook so badly the beam jittered across the page like a nervous heartbeat. Still, I wrote, Writing slowed my breathing, made the world feel just a hair less uncontrollable. 4 guys bought it in the shitter tonight, I wrote, pants around their ankles. One lived long enough to drag himself 10 feet with his guts trailing behind him. War doesn't give a damn about dignity. Another flare ignited overhead, turning the trench into sharp black and white clarity. For a few seconds I could see everything. Thompson's bitten down fingernails, the dried blood crusted on my cuffs, the trembling in my own knuckles. O'Malley's mouth is wide open. Then the flare died and the world snapped back to blind chaos. Incoming after incoming. So close they didn't sound like explosions anymore, just enormous angry breaths. The earth trembled, coughing dust into our helmets, our eyes, our teeth. Each blast punched air out of my lungs. Dirt clods fell like hail. Something sharp skimmed the back of my neck and left a thin, burning line behind. Thompson nudged me with his boot. "He's tone deaf, you know," he said, meaning O'Malley. I coughed a laugh. A thin, shaking thing. "Yeah, but he's loud." "That's something," Thompson said. Hours passed, or minutes, or lifetimes. There was no difference. I wrote until my pencil snapped, kept writing with the broken half until it carved sideways. When that piece wore down to nothing, I stuffed the journal back under my jacket. The cover was sticky, sweat or someone else's blood. Hard to tell in the dark. A round hit close enough that the dirt wall collapsed inward, showering us with rocks. Thompson brushed himself off. Somewhere down the trench, a kid, a private, maybe 18, started sobbing. Not wailing, just soft, hopeless sounds. Another Marine told him to shut up. Another told him it was okay. Neither made a difference. The barrage kept walking its neat, hateful grid. Boom, pause, boom, pause. We just endured. There was nothing else to do. Around 0400, suddenly, anticlimactically, the shelling stopped. Just stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. The silence that followed was monstrous, terrifying. My ears rang. My heartbeat thudded loud enough to feel in my fingertips. Somewhere, a man whimpered for morphine. Somewhere else, someone sighed because he still had all his fingers and toes. I didn't move for a long time. Then, slowly, stiffly, I closed my eyes, leaned my head back against the dirt, and let the night settle around me like a blanket full of holes. Tomorrow, they said, we'd start digging in for real.